The State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflects these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Once again, I extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD. We have established a quorum, and I will call roll. Ms. Rodriguez.
Jennifer Rodriguez, here.
Ms. Canoyer.
Suzanne Canoyer, here.
Ms. King.
Shatanya King, here.
Mr. Diaz.
Rafael Diaz, present.
And I am Renee Pichelle, present. To my left is our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Jeanette Ball.
Welcome, thank you.
And our other board member, Ms. Deborah Eaton, has arrived. Ms. Eaton?
Present.
Thank you. All right, at this time, since we have established a quorum, are there any visitors, the citizens to be heard? We will move on to item 3, discussion items, reports. Dr. Ball?
Yes, it is that time of the year where we start talking about the budget. I'd like to remind everybody that Judson ISD has a July 1st budget, and also the fact that this being a legislative year, there's a lot of changes that could happen. So this tonight starts our preliminary work, so it allows us to share information with the board, and at the same time, most importantly, hear from the board any concerns, any future things that you would like for us to bring to the board. And Mr. Atkins, Dr. Fields, Marco, the entire team, but certainly those 3 individuals have done a lot of work to prepare. So I'm going to just turn it over to Mr. Atkins, and we will start our budget workshop.
Good evening. Thank you. Madam President, Board, Dr. Ball, this is the first of, right now we have planned 4 workshops, so, and we can add some if we need to. So, this is not the right one. I apologize. Yeah. We downloaded the wrong one.
While Mr. Atkins is doing that, I also would like, well, I'll put this in the Friday notes, but I'd also like for the board to please consider for us to have an additional meeting. If you know that, recall, next Thursday, we are having our regular board meeting, but I would like to ask you to calendar February 23rd at 5:30 here for a growth and planning meeting. And I hope that that'll give the board enough time to calendar that, but also, it's going to be a busy time. It's going to be a busy time with additional meetings, additional things to do, but I promise you that at the end, it's going to be great things for our district. So if, Betty will still, of course, send you the invite and get more information, but if anybody has any concerns over that, please let me know, and at this time, we could still adjust it, but the 23rd seems to work for everybody. Awesome.
And
You said that was February 23rd at what time?
Yeah,
At 5:30, it's a Tuesday at 5:30.
Okay. That works for me. I'll put it on my calendar.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez.
Okay, sorry about that. We actually picked up a workshop from last year that was still on the desktop. So tonight I'll give you an update on where we are with our current budget. We'll look at our taxable value. Remember, we're current year taxable values. We're not prior years. We'll look at the House Bill 3 tax compression and talk about defeasance again. We'll look at our enrollment trends, what some of our assumptions are. We'll look at some costs to provide some raises and make our salary a little more competitive. And we'll also talk about what's not in the budget. And then, of course, feel free to ask questions anytime. So, looking at where we are currently year to date, this is our general fund. On the left-hand side is our current budget. On the right is our year to date, and you can see the percentages. We were about 50% through the year at the end of December, which these numbers came from. And you can see revenue-wise, that's about where we are. A little bit lower on the state, but again, we get a lot of our money in July and August. Federal revenue looks like it's down a lot, but we get our SHARS money in April, and that'll be over $3 million. Looking at our expenditures, again, just trying to say we're halfway through the year, where we at. Looking pretty good in all the areas. Debt, you can see we've already made our maintenance tax note payment for this year, so it's almost 100%. And the inflows down there, that is the settlement from Copperfield. So that's what that is. So we have a budget that says we're going to be about $8 million deficit, but right now we're running about 4.1. Child nutrition, this one's not quite as a good picture. On the revenue side, again, we're about halfway through the year. You can see we collected 28% of our local money. We don't get a whole lot of state money there, and our federal reimbursements are around 21%, and that's just because we're feeding so many fewer students. Our expenditures are running about where they need to, but again, they are definitely outpacing our revenues, and right now they're looking at a $2.8 million deficit. We did get some good news last week. U.S. Department of Ag finally came out with a program to help child nutrition programs, and so we're estimating we'll get about a $1.1 million reimbursement from them. Debt service, again, we're collecting our taxes, so we're about 60% on our local. Get a little bit from the state, we've already received that, and we've made all our debt payments. The inflows and outflows is just how we record our refunding of the bonds that we did in January. So when we look forward to the biennium, the comptroller's revenue estimate was actually better than most people thought. It's just slightly down from last biennium, but costs are up, so it's still going to be a tough budget. Both Senate and House have proposed full funding for public ed, but it's very early. They've also said that they would fund growth. There are talks about extending the hold harmless for the second part of the 2021 school year. I believe the commissioner said he would make a decision in February, which would definitely be good for us. The elementary and secondary school emergency relief, we had ESSER last year, and if you remember, the state didn't send it down to us really. They actually reduced our foundation money and supplanted that. That funding's supposed to be appropriated by January of 2022, and it's 5 times the amount that was the state received last time. So we'll see how they decide to appropriate that. And of course, this is a redistricting year for the legislature, and if you know the history, people tend to leave the state sometimes. It could be a long, drawn-out legislative process. Taxable value, we've been blessed. Our taxable value has gone up consistently. This past year went up about 9%. This right now is an estimate of a 5% increase. We did talk to the appraisal district this week. It's very early in their process. They said commercial is definitely going to go down, especially hotels, lodging, restaurants, entertainment. Those were the hard-hit industries. They continue to see strong growth in the industrial segment as well as the residential. So we're hoping that we continue to grow there. And our collections history is running about 98%, and so that's what I estimated, 98%. So when we look at House Bill 3, remember it was it was a tax bill, a property tax relief bill, more than it was an education funding bill. But it was good for districts. And so they compress our maintenance and operation Tier 1 tax rate every year based upon, they limit our growth to 2.5%, our value growth. And so in 2019, they compressed our tax rate down to 93 cents. Last year, it was compressed down to 86. And this year, if we have a 5% value growth, it'll go down to the 84.15. Now, they don't compress Tier 2. And if, you know, we took the fifth penny last year, and of course, I would think we would take the fifth penny this year. So an M&O tax rate of about 89.15. Remember, this is actually set by TEA, and so we won't actually get our official Tier 1 tax rate until August. And so that's about a 2-cent tax rate savings from last year. INS side, very similar. The current tax rate we have is 0.3628. A 5% value growth would drop the tax rate if we just did it to make our payment to 0.335. And so there's another 2.7 cents in tax rate savings. So potential in 5 cents in savings. And so with the compression, if you remember last year before COVID, we talked about a defeasance resolution. And what that is that allows us to pay off debt quicker by being able to increase our debt tax rate. Now, we can't go above where we are now, but we could keep our tax rate the same and you only use that to pay off debt, interest, and principal. And at a 5% tax rate, you could see we could pay off an additional $4 million in debt and additional 3.8 in interest. And that does a couple things. As we look forward to the future, it provides us some capacity in our tax rate and being able to go and ask voters potentially for a no tax increase bond. So what is our tax rate when we look at other districts? We fall right around the middle on the low side. Alamo Heights, East Central, Edgewood, and Northeast are the only ones lower than us. So the board has done a really good job of managing the tax rate for taxpayers. Enrollment. Of course, enrollment is the big one in the funding formula. We were blessed. I think we're the only district in Bexar County to grow this year. We started our pre-K3 program, which helped us. We don't, unfortunately, can't do pre-K2. So, and with as many charters as Dr. Ball has responded to this year, I've estimated a 1% enrollment decline. I hope that doesn't happen, but there's a very good possibility. So that would give us the budget assumptions of an average daily attendance of 21,430, the estimated taxable value of $11,920,000,000, 98% tax collections, M&O rate of 0.8915, and a INS tax rate of 0.3834. So it would be the total rate of 1.2749, which is what we currently have. Now, if we choose not to do a tax defeasance resolution, then we would drop that rate.
Bill, Could you please explain one more time what exactly it would mean to do the tax defeasance?
So right now, without a defeasance resolution, we have to drop our tax rate to be under the no new tax rate. And that's a calculation done by the county. And it limits, again, that value growth to 2.5% on our Tier 1. It allows us to have our Tier 2 pennies. And it limits your INS tax rate to what you need to pay your debt payment. And so, without the tax defeasance resolution, we would drop our tax rate by about 5 cents, so it would be about 1.22 instead of 1.27. And we would only make our bond payments that year. If you keep it up, then we can go in and they can do what we call defease bonds, which is pay them off early, and lower the amount of debt that we have outstanding. And so we would lower our principal and interest payments that are due in the future. And so, again, that provides some capacity if we need additional debt in the future, and if we want to do a TRE, whatever we need to do, or just provide tax relief to the taxpayers.
So, well then, would that be something that we would just put on the June agenda and then the board approve, or would we be doing it earlier or later
We would do it in May.
in May? Questions?
So if we don't do the defeasance and we go down to the lower tax rate, then it's much more difficult to raise the tax rate later should we need it. Is that
Yes.
okay? So
Yes.
this would be also not just,
Yeah.
To help us pay off the debt, but also make it more simple should we have to incur more expenses that we have that.
Yes, ma'am. It's typically easier to tell people to support things with a no tax increase versus I need to increase your taxes. We also really hope the state will continue to provide funding for virtual instruction in the next biennium. They have not come out and said that, but that if they don't do that, I think that's going to be very hard for us to maintain our enrollment. We're also looking at trying to do a hiring freeze except for necessary positions. And again, I'll show you just what that means as we get down to looking at the budget numbers. So this is our revenue estimates. And so I did 4 of them. The first one is we have the same ADA that we had last year, and we get about $195 million in M&O funding, and the INS is not impacted. It would stay the same. If we dropped 0.5% of ADA, which is about 110 students, we would lose $1 million. If we dropped 1%, which is what we're looking at when we look at the numbers tonight, we lose almost $1.5 million in revenue. And so the ADA really drives that number up and down. So how could you get additional revenue? We ask that a lot. Increase enrollment. 100 students is $676,000. We currently access 5 of our 17 pennies in tax effort allowed in Tier 2. We could do a tax ratification election to access additional pennies. Those are now required on the November election date, and each penny would provide about $2.5 million in additional funding. So when we look at our budget, between our payroll, which is about $170 million, and these are operational costs that are really hard to control. The legal fees we've done much better. The tax appraisal and collections, that's based upon our appraised value, and as it goes up, that goes up. Our utilities, I think, are going up each year. Fuel, luckily, is pretty stable. Yes, ma'am.
On the utilities, does that number also reflect, you know how we always, well, not always, but since I've been on the board, we've received that refund from them for doing so well?
Yeah, when we get that refund, we put it in the miscellaneous revenue. So it's not on the expenditure side, but there's a miscellaneous revenue where it goes put in. Yes, ma'am, but it is in the budget. Insurance has gone up and will probably continue to go up on the commercial side. Our maintenance tax note, we have a few more years left on it. Campus allotments, I left the same. Our district-wide technology licenses and fees, the more we go virtual, the more that cost. And we've put a lot into that, and thank you for supporting that. Department allotments, and a lot of this is maintenance, transportation. Those are expensive departments. So about $39.2 million out of the $206 million budget is operational, and the rest is payroll. So we have, again, an estimated revenue of $206.7 million. Our current payroll is $170 million, so that's not giving a raise, not doing a bunch of hiring. Operational budget we looked at is 39.2, so that leaves us with about a $2.5 million deficit. Now, $2.5 million would cost, if we wanted to reduce that $2.5 million, we could reduce 51 FTEs, or we could gain 371 students. So that's the value. So raise cost. I know this board is very supportive of our staff, and they want to give a raise, especially since last year we did not. And so you see the various raise cost. 1% raise would raise the teacher's salary $580, cost $1.9 million, and the FTEs would be about 39. 2%, which is what we're going to look at tonight, would raise teacher's salary $1,160, cost $3.8 million, and it would take 78 FTEs to equal that. So that's what it looks like with the students in there. So if we wanted to try and grow students, it would take 564 additional students to pay for that $3.8 million.
On top of the 371?
On top of the 371. And we would have, that would pay for the $6.3 million deficit.
With the raise?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, Bill. Is it
No, go
okay to
ahead.
ask you a question
But
now, or do you prefer at the end?
Speak into your microphone.
Do you prefer the questions now or at the end?
Right now, let's ask them.
Do the children in the PK3 and PK4 program, for the lack of a better term, come with the same dollars? Like, is the revenue stream the same as children in K and above?
No, they provide half day funding from
Okay.
the state,
Okay. so
not
they
full day
provide-
funding.
Okay. So these are our full-time students.
These would be full-time students.
So if we're if our pipeline is growing at the bottom at a younger age, then we could have a mix of students to make up
Correct.
this, right?
Correct.
And that's where we're normally drawing them in from.
Actually, this year we grew quite a bit at our high schools. It was quite interesting. I mean, we grew in pre-K3 because it was a new program, but our high schools actually grew quite a bit this year.
Do y'all think that's sustainable, or was that an impact of COVID?
I could not answer that. I hope it's sustainable. I know, we'll talk a little bit about it, but we continue to see pretty strong growth on the north side of our district, up around Wortham Oaks. And there's really quite a lot of growth down around Converse Elementary, Metzger Elementary, Metzger Middle School, Escondido, Masters. Yeah, there's lots of subdivisions. And Janice is working on a sheet that I can provide y'all that will show you how many subdivisions and which schools they impact. And along with that, we have 4 apartment complexes going on.
Mr. Diaz, the reason I believe that it's sustainable, of course, this being the first year that we're doing virtual, I have no data yet. But one of the reasons that I believe it's sustainable is because for some students, it really is something that they're being very successful at virtually, where they're not having to come to the building. We got several phone calls from outside of even Bexar County if they could register in our district. And we did allow that because when you're virtual, you can live and be anywhere you want. We also allowed students that were not even residing in the state to continue to attend school virtually. So I think that having that flexibility really allows us to do some different things. Though we don't know for sure, I can't imagine how the commissioner would not fund virtual school. I don't see virtual ever going away. I think that we have to find a way to do it different and better. But we as a team have discussed many times that virtual is never going to go away because some kids are being very successful at it. They really are, and they're thriving. And then some parents really do like that flexibility. So, though, again, we have no data, there are some things that lead us to believe that that is something that we will be able to sustain.
Do you, in the presentation, do you all have, or maybe you know, what the transfers out of the district year over year are?
We don't have it in this presentation, but that is something that the team, we discussed it in our senior staff meeting, and PEAMS falls under Ms. Davis, and that is something that they're already working on. So we will have it for another presentation.
Okay. Does that PEAMS report also track students coming back in from charters?
Yeah. It tracks where they come, when they're coming and registering, so then we just have to do a little bit of extra digging as to where they came from. Because there's a form that's called T-Rex, and it's not really a paper form, but it's a system that we use when a student withdraws, and then we get their records. So using T-Rex, we'll be able to get that information.
Okay.
Yes?
Can you hear me? Okay. Also, hopefully, the demographics company can determine where the kids are in our district and where they go somewhere else, because we see that, we're a military district, so Fort Sam and Randolph have a lot of students that live in Judson but go there to the tune of almost 3,000. So if we pull all them back, that would be good. As well as the ones, like you said, that go to charters. If the demographics company can determine where they go, then that could be a group of students that we could target to bring back as well.
Thank you.
I have a quick clarifying question, Mr. Atkins, about the data on here. So just for my understanding, FTE stands for full-time employees?
Yes, ma'am. And that's
Okay.
that's just using I took our entire payroll and divided by the total number of our employees, so that's an average, and it comes out to about $49,000 per FTE.
Okay. And so, so if I'm reading this correctly, the $2.5 million, for example, on this subtotal line is the equivalent of 51 full-time employee salaries on average, and would need, so like it's in order to make that balance zero, we would either need to cut 51 employees or like positions through attrition, not like we're cutting people out, or we need to increase enrollment by 371. But just stop me if I'm not being logical here. If we have 371 more students across the district, we would likely need to hire a few more teachers as well, correct?
That is true. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I'm just making sure I understand what those numbers mean in those columns.
Correct. So I know y'all received some information about our pay scale compared to others. And Marco has told us for many years that when we have teachers about 6 years, they start leaving the district because they can get $3,000 or more dollars at neighboring districts. And so we've been asked to look at what it would kind of look like and what it would cost to really try and be competitive and try and keep our great teachers. And so I know this is small. I can definitely send you a handout. But the left column is our current payroll pay scale. The middle column would be what it would take between the 2% raise and equity to provide a total of $3,000 additional to teachers between the 6 and 20-year range. Now, it doesn't just start and stop there, because to keep the scale, you have to kind of feather it out on both ends. And beside that is our Schertz-Cibolo pay scale, current one. And you can see we don't get there all the way, but we get pretty close. And so now, instead of leaving for $3,300, they're leaving for $300. And so that's an additional cost on top of the 2% raise. And so that teacher equity scale would cost an additional $2 million. And of course, there's the FTEs and the students. And we have a deficit of $8.3 million. The other thing that we have going forward is there is lots of talk about raising the minimum starting wage to $15 an hour. When we look at our employees that are under that, all of them fall in our 200 and 300 pay scales. And so this is our hourly employees and our paras and aides. And so we don't really want to wait and try and do this all in 1 year. And so Marco, myself, got together, and so what we came up with was for an additional $2.2 million, our ACP current starting pay is $9 an hour. We could get that up to 14. Our current CIS, which is our aides and paras, is currently $10.50, and we could get that up almost to 15, not quite, for the additional $2 million. But then that puts us in a position that in a future year, because I think they're not going to come out and say you have to do $15 all at once. I think they're going to phase it in. But with a raise, we could be there. And I just think our employees really deserve it. They work hard. So that leaves us with a $10 million deficit. Now, we put $10 million in fund balance this year because we had lots of expenditures that didn't happen last spring. So last year at this time, we were looking at a $78 million fund balance. Now we're looking at an $88 million fund balance. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm a little okay with that. Just a little. Yes, ma'am.
That would be for the first year, but so then what about going forward?
That is exactly why we wanted to look at FTEs and students, because these are all reoccurring costs.
So, Ms. Eaton.
Because I'm thinking about, we have some stuff on the agenda. We had 5 new requests come in just for this month alone for charter schools.
Yes.
There's 5 on there. We've had no less than 2 every month for a minute, and that's also going to impact us.
Right. So one of the, if you don't mind, if I could speak on that for a little bit. So there's a couple of things that we continue to do. One of them is my constant evaluation and looking at positions and looking at programs. making sure that we're truly utilizing and maximizing our positions and that our programs are being effective. A lot of times things continue as a cycle because, well, we've always done it like that, or because sometimes things fall off the plate and we don't look at it and it just continues. So that's certainly something that we continue to do. The other thing that is critical to our district is having things that sets us apart from other school districts. For example, one of the things that we're going through, and Ms. Robinson will probably be presenting this at the March or April board meeting, is the rebranding of one of our campuses. One of our campuses is going to be like a magnet specialty type campus. And across Bexar County, you'll notice that a lot of school districts are going to that because parents want their child to go to a place that's special, unique, and it has their interest, and it has the child's interest. So I think with those two things, it'll still put Judson in a good position to make sure that we're always increasing attendance, and B, always looking at the FTEs. The other thing that Mr. Atkins he's very humble and doesn't give himself credit, is he did a fantastic job in our refinancing. So that was a huge savings to our district. So Mr. Atkins, please go ahead and share a little bit about that too, because again, he's very humble. He doesn't share these great things that he does.
Well, like I said, we were very lucky. The bond market was very favorable to us when we went out. We were estimating to save about $20 million worth of principal and interest on those bonds, and we ended up saving $25 million worth of interest on those principal and interest on those bonds. And so that dropped, that was pretty good savings all the way across the board.
So I do think $25 million is a really good savings. I think that some of the things that you'll hear in a little bit also in regards to how we want to really move our district forward with doing more specialties, more magnet, creating those opportunities for making this the destination district will help us not lose our students. Yes, ma'am.
By all means, I don't, by no means rather do I want to be misunderstood. I'm all for it. Mm-hmm. I just don't want it to end up being we give it to you, but we got to take it back, or we can only give it to you this one time. And I know, because if I get a pay raise, I want to keep it. And I truly appreciate how you're restructuring our district to be about quality, not necessary quantity, because unnecessary quantity costs us dollars that we can be using to maintain and entice the quality of staff and teachers that we want. So I appreciate that. And I'm looking at the numbers. I understand. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
And please know, I don't mind your question or any board member's question, because this is something that as senior staff, we continuously talk about how we have to do things differently, and it's hard. So no, I appreciate the questions, because then I'm able to share some of the things. And really, there could be a lot more that I could share, because I feel that our marketing and our communications that we're doing has truly increased a lot, and we'll be reaping the rewards of those types of things. Then I could go on to tell you the two campuses that are doing the immersion programs. I think that that's also going to be a very beneficial program for our district. So I think there's lots of things that we have in mind and are planning to do that will continue to enhance what we bring.
Okay. So what's not in the budget? There's always more needs than there are dollars to fund anything. And broke it down into kind of two areas. We have growth in our district. Not just enrollment growth, but this last year with COVID, our teachers had to grow. We had to change the way we did our instruction, the way we delivered our instruction. I think it's opened up an opportunity, like Dr. Ball said, that we can continue to service more students because of that virtual instruction. And so I think the instruction's been really strong in the growth this year. Again, I mentioned that our north side around Wortham Oaks, we have lots of subdivisions going in. On the south side, we see subdivisions and apartment complexes. And again, we have seen a growth in charters. But you know, charters are targeting students, and they're selling customer service and convenience. And so that's something that we have to start really making sure that we look at. Equity in the districts, like Dr. Ball said, programs, specialty programs. When we look at San Antonio ISD, Northeast, they have many specialty programs from elementary to high school. We have some. Our CATE programs are specialties. We have J-STEM, we have T-STEM. And so we have some, but I think, again, that's an opportunity that we have to provide equity in our district compared to other districts and make it very appealing for parents to come. Facilities, this is a never-ending equity issue. You know, you have schools that are 25 years old, and you have schools that are 3 years old. And they don't have the same spaces. And we're learning now that through virtual instruction, maybe some of those spaces, even in those newer schools, aren't exactly what they need to be anymore. Do we need to have libraries with stacks of books? We're going to have some books, but a lot of kids read online. So, you know, what can we look at? And I know curriculum instruction is looking at that. Safety. Back in February, we were talking about school shootings. Now we're talking about social distancing. We're talking about sneeze guards. We're talking about masks. We're talking about how do you feed kids when they have to sit 6 foot apart. Again, our facilities weren't designed for that. And that's not in the budget. And then the technology. Keeping up with the technology, just to keep our one-to-one program is about $2 million a year. And that's been successful. So I think there's equity in the district that we have to look at. And those are some tough questions. And I think we can address those needs. We can support a new instructional delivery method. We can support growth in the district. We can support equity in the district. And we potentially can do it with no increase to taxpayers. And so I think Dr. Fields is going to jump in now with a little bit of further discussion about how we go from there. No, sir. Come on up.
Good evening once again, Madam President, board members, and Dr. Ball. My slide is brief. I've got one. And because we really want to make sure that we maintain the focus on the budget. That's why we're here tonight, and we want to make sure that we get this started by a focus on what we need in terms of budgetary concerns. But in the growth and planning meeting, as you guys know, Dr. Ball kind of renamed the board advisory committees recently. And one of them was the insurance, growth and planning, and then I think the other one was Hall of Fame committee. And that was done based on what the focus needs of the district are right now. So the growth and planning committee meeting is getting warmed up. And as you know, I contacted you guys to see if you had certain representatives in your respective districts that you would like to recommend to serve on the committee. And all of you got back with me immediately. Thank you so much. I was able to get in touch with Ms. Rodriguez's, Ms. Eaton, Pashal, and Canoyer. I'm still working on Ms. Canoyer's representative, but Mr. Diaz and Ms. King also got back with me and said that they wanted to clarify what their recommendation was going to be. So we also have 11 principals that we asked to serve on the committee. And we asked them to find advocates, community members that would then go back and let everyone know what we're trying to do in the community going forward to address what Mr. Atkins referred to as the equity and growth needs throughout the district. So they're recommending 2 people as well. And we're ready to get started. Our first meeting is going to be on the 1st of March, and then we have 6 subsequent meetings that are coming after that. And we're going to send out an email real soon with an invitation. Now, our board representatives are Ms. Rodriguez and Mr. Diaz, so I'm sure you guys will be there. Some of the consideration of programs going forward, you heard what Bill said about we're just going to have to look at what we're doing a little bit more effectively. When we go forward, do we stick with the K through 5, or is it better to have K through 8 in some areas across the district to get a better utilization of the facilities that we have? When you look at some of the facilities that we have, there's this big open area that Becky and Ceci were talking about, or I think it was Dr. Ball, that mentioned in the middle of those pods that we have in the new elementaries, are we best utilizing those, and then the libraries themselves. So we want to look at that going forward, the educational philosophy. We need a charge kind of from the board and the superintendent to say, hey, we want to frame this around this particular vision and mission going forward. So we'd like to meet with the board before we start that meeting on the 1st of March. And you heard Dr. Ball mention before the meeting started that tentatively, I believe that's the 23rd, Dr. Ball, at 5:30. So if we could pull you guys back together and kind of pick your brains and say, what are some of your concerns? What are some of the things that you see? That way, when we get ready to go forward, we know what to introduce to the Growth and Planning Committee as we move forward. And then, helping us, we have Mr. Hornbuckle from Pfluger Architects, crafting this and putting it together. So we're really appreciative of his efforts as well. That's really all I had to say. Are there any concerns or questions? Thank you guys so much. Sorry.
I just had a quick clarifying question. So the meeting on the 23rd is just with the board, and then the one on March 1st will be like a full with the community representatives, the principals, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So, in summary, we could use the tax compression and passing the defeasance resolution and allow us to use reduce some of our outstanding debt. Limiting hiring would allow for raises in equity. Increase in pay scales to be competitive with neighboring districts. Increase in our pay scales to move us towards that starting wage. We want to continue the Wagner feeder program to continue that equity that we started last year. Tax rate remained the same as this year. And then, how do we prepare for growth and increase that equity? And that's really, I did put next steps. So February and March, we'll be looking at staffing. March 18th, we have a budget workshop. April 22nd, we have a budget workshop. June 3rd, we have a budget workshop. The 24th right now, scheduled to hold a hearing and adopt the budget. And then again, we won't be able to set the tax rate until August.
To going all the way back to the slide for the teacher pay scale. And while Mr. Atkins, perfect, that one. This one is what I really want some feedback from the board. One of the things is this is the time of the year where teachers start to look, where we also internally also do our transfers. So any employee within the district could look and transfer to another campus. Individuals start seeing on the job sites where there's opening in other districts and things like that. As Bill mentioned in our timeline, is traditionally the board adopts the budget in June, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's even earlier than a lot of school districts because a lot of them are not a July 1st. But one of the things that the biggest, I would call it homework piece that I would want the board to look at is to look at this and think of the numbers that Mr. Atkins shared, look at the FTEs, look at our fund balance, look at everything, and truly think about making a commitment to this in March or in April. So we could use this as a tool to keep our teachers. I want this to be the year that we have very few teachers leaving us. One of the things that we talk a lot about is making sure Tier 1 instruction is solid. Having good Tier 1 instruction will make such a difference, because that means less students in tutoring, less students in Tier 2 and Tier 3. But the best way to do that is to retain our good teachers. It's not a secret that many times people will say, Judson ISD does a great job training them for us, getting them with a few years of experience, and then they leave. But I want this to be the year that we stop this. So I'd really like for when we come back, and let me look at my calendar. I know Bill had it up there. March 8th. When we come back in March 8th, really have consideration to be able to say, and that's okay, Bill. I'm going to send this slide deck.
March 18th.
Oh, March 18th. I'm going to send this slide deck to all the boards so y'all can review it and have it with you.
So we are going to.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to send it tomorrow in the Friday notes. So y'all can really make a commitment to our teachers, because I know that you value our teachers. And there's a lot of decisions that will need to be made with the budget. But if we could make this a priority in the beginning, so teachers could really know, hey, if I commit to Judson, this is what my new pay scale would be. So I'd really like to hear thoughts about this and questions, of course, anything, but specifically to this, because then this would be something that Mr. Atkins would have to go and rework and look at. So again, this would be approximately, the 2% raise with the equity adjustment to bring us close. We know we wouldn't be exactly, but it would be close to aligning to another district that's our neighbor. And I think that this would send a huge impact to our teachers, that we're doing the best that we can with, of course, always trying to improve, but putting our best foot forward. Yes, ma'am.
I'm all in favor of sending this out early, and for several reasons. One, as a thank you to our teachers and our staff who've worked so hard this year. But another big reason that we want to make sure we retain is we know we're going to have students who come back next year with a lot of academic deficits, simply because of the circumstances we're in. And if we can retain our teachers that we have trained, who know what we've done this year, I think that we'd be well ahead of the game when it comes to working with those students next year. And I'm all in favor of the raise and the equity. I know personally teachers who, because of their families' needs, have looked to other districts for that extra pay, even though they truly would rather be in Judson. So if we can approach some of those needs and show our teachers how much they're valued, our staff, I think it's great. I'm all for it.
I think Ms. Eaton had a question. Did you?
Go ahead, Ms. Eden.
See, my mind goes to so many other things that, add up into the money. And what I was asking Mr. Atkinson about, it may not have any effect, and it may. And I was just asking him about what's the difference in, taxes that are taken out of teachers' checks in our district as opposed to some of our suburban districts, because I know some of them are a little bit higher, and then I look at things like, I have 3 teachers that live on my block, by the way, and they're not Judson. But, if they didn't have to drive from where we live to where they work, that's a lot of gas money and time that they're saving. So if we can do something like this and I can swing them votes, I might be able to get them into Judson.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That would be great.
And it's 3 males, and they teach history. I love it.
Did Mr. Austin, you want to address that?
Really, the big difference is there's a couple. Public education in Texas school districts back in the day, don't ask me exactly what year, signed agreements, and you could either choose to participate in Social Security or not choose to participate in Social Security. And Judson ISD chose not to participate in Social Security. So because we have TRS, we don't pay Social Security, and we do pay Medicare. But there were districts in San Antonio ISD does participate in Social Security. And so a trend would be teachers 5 years before they retire want to go work at San Antonio ISD if they have quarters on Social Security so they can retire from an employer that pays Social Security so they have access and their spouse has access to Social Security. But that's really the big difference, would be just whether a district chose Social Security back in the day or did not choose Social Security back in the day.
That's something, that's a nice chunk of money, though, that
Yes, ma'am.
makes a difference in I'm sorry, I was just saying, that's a large chunk of money that makes a difference in a teacher's paycheck, so things like that, selling points.
Yes. I'll share also in the Friday notes another piece of data that Mr. Garcia shared with me. And Mr. Garcia also analyzed the teachers that are employed with us, where they live. So we have that information also. So I'll go ahead and I'll attach that on Friday tomorrow, because that was also very interesting as to where our teachers live, and they work and they come to work here.
Are we going to be shocked? No? Okay.
I think we'd be more shocked by how many people live in Judson and work in other districts. But that's neither here. I came off mute to ask another question, which is, first the comment, I'm fully supportive of giving our teachers a raise and investing particularly in that particular years of experience where we're seeing the equity is just very off. I think the other thing I wanted to ask is, when are we opening enrollment for next year and doing like the re-registration process to have a more accurate read on our enrollment numbers for next year? Because I know some districts have already started doing that. And then what are our retirement rates looking like? Folks who have already notified us that they plan to retire at the end of this year. Because I imagine that, this year has been stressful for everybody, but I imagine that it may have been a tipping point for some of our teachers who have been in the profession for a really long time. So those are just the two things that I'm curious about.
Sure. And I'm going to have Ms. Davis talk about the registration, because I know she's extremely excited. Last year, if you remember, COVID happened and then we had gone to a new system, but I don't want to steal her thunder, so let her go. Go ahead, Ms. Davis.
I can't speak about retirement rates. I'll leave that up to Mr. Atkins. But registration process, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
She says she can hear. She says thumbs up, yes.
Okay. So the registration process this year started out very well. If you recall, last year COVID hit, and we had just adopted our new online registration system, Frontline. So we had to begin registration really without thoroughly providing our PEMS clerks, but all of them were on board, and we jumped on board, and it was successful ultimately. But now we started registration already. February 1st, we were able to begin registration for our new students. It is running smoothly. We've just received our first report. And again, this is only for new incoming students to the district. On March 1st, we will begin registration for our current enrollment. On April, we will begin registration for our tuition based pre-K for pre-K 3, pre-K 4, and this year we are extending our pre-K tuition-based program to members even outside of Judson ISD. First, we will open registration for our community, and then 2 weeks later in April, we will open up the registration for those outside. we're willing to take any students. And if the state would allow us pre-K2, we would have done that as well, but they didn't. With that being said, registration is running smoothly, and Dr. Taganow has done a fantastic job of advertising through many different venues, as you guys read through the Friday notes.
And if my memory, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Tessie, so it's okay if you don't remember, we've only opened up on February 1st, and I think the count was either at 48 or 58 or something like that. I'm trying to remember for registration.
Of completed registrations, but we had about 60-some incomplete.
Oh, sorry, I was wrong, 60-something, sorry. Mhm.
Aside from the completed ones.
Okay.
Yes. So, and then the registrars, what they do is they'll be running a report every week for their campus and contacting the parents, because we'll now be able to see, contacting them, taking the customer service to the next level and saying, we've seen you've started your registration. How may I help you complete it? Any other questions?
Marco, would you like to address any resignations that you know of now? And I do think that this would even help us. If somebody's on the line, they might stay an extra year to get that year of credit. But Mr. Cortez?
Yes, ma'am. I agree. This year, we have approximately 30 teacher resignations. I think that was a question, Ms. Rodriguez, specifically to teachers. We usually average about 35 to 40 in a year. This year was different because a lot of teachers, because of COVID, retired the month that they were eligible. And in a typical year, they'd finish out their year or get to January where they can get their full credit year. This year we did see quite a few just from the get-go, as soon retiring September, October, the month that they were eligible. So I'm hopeful that we won't have as many, but I do anticipate that we'd have more than usual. We probably hit about 50 when it's all said and done, which represents about 1.9% of our teachers, and it's a little more than what we're used to. So it's going to end up slightly more than usual, but we've already seen the brunt of it on the front end, is my estimation.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm so sorry, y'all. Sorry.
No, not a problem.
Let me ask you a question then. With a pay raise like this, okay. Let me give you this example and just tell me if this applies in any way to teachers, because I really don't know.
Okay.
In the military, if you get promoted this year, in order for you to retire and take the retirement pay associated with that promotion, you have to stay an additional 2 years. Then when you retire, you can retire and you retire at that pay. If you only stay 1 year, then your retirement pay is based on the year, before you got. Does that happen with teachers?
Yes and no. So it depends on when you started, and Mr. Garcia is an expert at this, so I should probably ask him to go back to the mic. So depending on when you started, they either calculate your top 3 years or your top 5 years. So it's an average that they use for the TRS uses. So depending on when you started or when you were in the system, I think it changed in 1994 maybe.
When it went to different tier, I think 2009, 2007, when it went from 3 to 5.
So they calculated they used to calculate based on your 3 years and then on your 5 years. So that's why I think somebody might want to stay, because you would get use that as your extra 5th year.
Oh, okay.
So it might work.
That might. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Excellent question.
I'll just chime in real quick. I'm very happy to hear a lot of the things that are said, and thank you to the staff. Because there's nothing worse than exporting our own talent, because then we're left with this vacuum of talent in our own community, right? So this is great. It aligns perfectly. I think a lot of things that y'all have said today aligns exactly with that vision. My Cuban's coming out. The vision of building a destination district, right? Not only for the students and their families, but also for our educators. Perfect. Thank you.
I just want to thank the staff that I work with. This staff is amazing, amazing. Mr. Atkins, Dr. Fields, Ms. Robinson, Mr. Garcia, Dr. Taganoff, and Ms. Davis. Thank you for the work that you do because you guys are amazing. So thank y'all for making all these dreams come true for our staff and for our kids. So thank y'all. Thank you.
And can I just say, you blew me away with the $88 million fund balance. That was a big shock. I don't think we've ever had a fund balance that large.
No.
So, thank you.
I'm just going to be repeating what you've already heard. I'm so grateful to you, Dr. Ball, and your staff. Every one of you people out there are experts in your field, and I really appreciate it. I'm one of those old school people that need you to break things down for me, and you do it very well. I was just asking when you were talking about the defeasance, right, is it like refinancing?
It's really more like saying I'm going to make double payments on my mortgage.
Got
is
it.
really what it's
Got
more
it.
like.
Got it.
Yes, ma'am.
To lower your debt. Yeah, got it. Thank you, everyone. You all do a great job, and I'm very appreciative to you. Well, Dr. Ball?
That's all we have, ma'am, so everybody can get home safely.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned at 6:11. Thank you. Looking forward